Jonathan Ruhe was with us, Robert Sherman as well, and want to bring both of them back. I jumped on you, Robert, in the middle of a report, by the way, as the sirens were going off. So just finish your thought in terms of what's going on in Tel Aviv now, and then we'll get into some of the president's new comments.
Yeah, I mean, we just heard this barrage wrapping up here. I'd say we heard about 15 or so explosions taking place in the distance. Again, a little bit more difficult to see them tonight with the haze that's above. But I would also point out, you know, the timing of this most recent barrage here. It's Shabbat here in Israel, so as people celebrate the Sabbath, it tends to be a more vulnerable time for Iran to attack because most people don't have their phones with them and don't have access to those early alerts, so are truly beholden to the sirens going off here. But we see this playing into the calculus from Iran. You know, this is a typical time in which we see these attacks carried out here. And as we said before, you know, Jerusalem has really taken the brunt of these attacks so far today, but now Tel Aviv again tonight. So those capabilities that Iran has, they're still on display. And you see, you know, the tit-for-tat game that is played with the Israeli Air Force and the Americans. The second missiles are in the air, the goal is to put jets in the air in order to knock out those launchers. That's the game that you're seeing being played right now, Connell.
Yeah, it's these numbers that we get versus the descriptions that, you know, people like you on the ground give us. Like I'm looking at on my screen the daily launch activity. And, you know, these missiles and drones are down. There was a little slight uptick at the end of this particular screen, but for the most part, they're down. But to Robert's point, the capability is still there. Jonathan, on the president's comments there saying, you know, I think we've won, but all they're doing is clogging up the Strait. Says he also doesn't want to do a ceasefire. Now, on that point about all they're doing is clogging up the Strait, seems to me that is still an issue.
Yes, and as we just heard in the report from Tel Aviv, as Iran's military capabilities are progressively degraded, their launchers, a lot of their anti-ship missiles too are taken out. Increasingly, Iran's strategy is an asymmetric one, just as they use cluster warheads to try to drain Israeli interceptors and basically grind daily life to a halt in Israel, people constantly running to shelters. They're doing something similar in the Gulf. Iran has shown that they don't need to do very much to convince the Strait of Hormuz, to convince everyone the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and then to have these compounding effects around the world. So really, I mean, Trump can be right on both things. Iran's military is horribly degraded, and they're clogging up the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. It's all true. It's all true. And then, Robert, in the news today, we know, we were talking about this earlier, U.S. is trying to do something about it. I think the president said it, you know, something like, oh, it's a relatively simple military operation. But I did find it interesting that he said, we still need help. We need volume. We need the other countries.
Yeah, I mean, especially with a lot of these low altitude operations that you're seeing being carried out. I mean, it all boils down to eliminating the threat, Connell, because, I mean, for many of these shipping companies don't want the liability, don't want to hazard the risk of sending ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Even if Iran's capabilities are degraded 90%, that still leaves 10%, and that still leaves a very tangible threat for a lot of these shipping companies and for a lot of civilians that are in the region. So you pretty much have to bring that threat almost all the way down to the point in which any of these companies will feel comfortable sending ships through. And right now, I mean, I would say, I mean, as you put that chart up, you know, you have seen the capabilities diminish, but they are still there, and they do still worry people.
Yeah, so it brings us to the question of endgame. The president, I thought he took off with a helicopter. Again, he stopped to talk more, but he moved down the line away from that boom mic that we were getting audio from. I don't think this is... Oh, no, we can't hear it. Let's listen for a second.
We are in the process of doing it, and I'll tell you, I think we're weeks ahead of schedule. My Secretary of State is very happy. You have a question for Marco? Yes. How soon President Trump said this week that he can take you... What are you guys hearing from your Senate colleagues about the chances of the state of America passing that? Seems to be doing okay. Voter ID, you have to have citizenship to vote, and I'm hearing very good things. I mean, I was hearing negative things because the Democrats are all against voter ID. They're all against citizenship to vote. They're against transgender. You know, they like the transgender thing with mutilization of your children. All of the things that we talk about. You know, we added two little elements. No men in women's sports.
right? You know that. We added that. And when you add them all up, whether you take 4 or 5, I think they're all 95 to 99% issues. I hear it's going, look, it should be an easy pass, but we need Democrat votes. They don't want to approve voter ID because they cheat. They don't want to approve citizenship. In other words, we want to have citizenship in order to vote. You have to prove your citizenship. The Democrats don't want to do that. You know why, Peter? You know why? Because they want to cheat, Peter. Now, speaking of something that's more pleasant, see that? It's going to be the greatest ballroom anywhere in the world. Nothing like it. And they just started today one of the biggest pours of concrete that's ever been seen in Washington, D.C.
When they're doing the construction, does it ever wake you up?
It makes me happy. When I hear those pile drivers, my wife doesn't love it, but I love this. I love the sound of concrete. I love the sound of pile drivers.
There he goes. This time for real, I think. Rubio, what's he looking for? All right, so there they go. The shot breaks. You know, as we bring Jonathan and Robert back, I think we have a few minutes. You know, on a lighter note, for the life of me, I can never understand of all the things. I know Robert's covered the White House. But why on earth we do that in this day and age of having a big helicopter making a ridiculous amount of noise and having 2 guys screaming over it so we can't hear. I mean, there's got to be a better way if the president wants to talk to the press on the way out. So that's my one editorial comment for the day. Jonathan, I was about to ask you about Endgame, right? That all of this leads up. You know, Robert was talking about it. The president was talking about getting the Strait of Hormuz open. And I did notice he was asked again about the U.S. and Israel and seemed to say, yeah, if he wants to end it, he being Trump, that Netanyahu would be on board. How do you see the whole thing? Like, are you getting a vision in your mind of how it eventually ends?
Yeah, I think as the war has gone on and Iran has, I think, surprised the president in a couple of ways, being more resilient than perhaps he expected, but also being willing to escalate against the entire region and make this a global problem for the United States. You know, I think we've heard Trump's statements become a little less fulsome and ambitious than in the beginning, where he said he essentially wanted to collapse the regime. He said he's not interested in a ceasefire. I think that's fine. The Iranians have made clear they're not either. So really this comes down to what strategic objectives can you achieve? If the regime doesn't collapse, the United States has to be absolutely sure that in addition to degrading the capabilities we've talked about, that Iran is not able, after the war ends, to immediately dash for a nuclear weapon, because they would have stronger incentive than ever to do that. So making sure that those capabilities are eliminated and completely understand where they are, I think that's the main hurdle that needs to be achieved beyond what we've talked about in terms of reopening the Strait.
But just to follow up, Jonathan, real quick on that, you can see a scenario where relative victory is achieved by the United States and Israel and some remnant of the Iranian regime is still in power?
I certainly think so. Certainly not the most ideal outcome. I don't necessarily think it's the most likely one, but certainly think it's on the table today in a way that it wasn't 3 weeks ago when this began.
What do you think is the most likely outcome?
I think the most likely outcome is that Iran, to some extent, succeeds. Like, their definition of success is a very low bar. It's the regime survives in some way, and they prove that they can, or they can claim some definition of victory by having shut the Strait of Hormuz, intimidated the entire Middle East with the exception of Israel, and basically stood up to, as they call us, the great Satan. For us, everything is about their relationship with the United States and Israel. If they can claim victory in some sense in that way, I think that's perhaps the way the war ends. But at the same time, the United States, President Trump would claim victory by saying correctly that he drastically reduced the region's largest ballistic missile arsenal, and hopefully, ideally, also remove the nuclear threat from the regime.
Jonathan Ruhe, thank you. Robert, we'll talk to you again in a few minutes when we check our top stories at the top of the hour. I want to go to the